You know, again, I say this respectfully,
Yes.
because I hear my intention is to be loving, but we need to stand firm on Bible principles. And we cannot change this one thing thinking it won't affect everything else. It will.
Welcome to Conversations, brought to you by It Is Written. My guest is Pastor Nelson Mercado. He is a pastor in Nashville, Tennessee. He's written another book. Pastor Mercado, welcome back to Conversations.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. It's good to be here.
It's great to have you last time. Good to have you this time.
Thank you.
The book, The Present Truth and the LGBTQ plus Movement. The Present Truth and the LGBTQ plus Movement. I'll read the subheading of the book, the subtitle, in just a moment. Why'd you write the book?
Well, last time I was here, we talked about the first book, The Present Truth and the Three Angels' Messages.
Yes.
We talked about that. And you did ask me about what's next. And I mentioned, well, I have an idea about the follow-up to this book. And in fact, by God's grace, what I'd like to do is do a Present Truth series, so a number of books that'll be part of the Present Truth series.
You're off to a good start. There's two now.
And so I had a different idea for the follow-up. However, back in 2023, I believe it was, at the Kentucky-Tennessee camp meeting, I was having a conversation with a gentleman, a member of our church. I can't remember his name now because it's camp meeting, it's from different churches. And we were having a conversation about the first book, The Present Truth and the Three Angels' Messages, in the concept of present truth. And he was in agreement. He liked the book and everything, but he made a comment to me. He said, you know, I understand this concept of present truth and the relevance of prophecy and everything, but I wish we could include in what we know as present truths some things that are more for today, something more relevant things for today. And then and they asked the question, what do I tell my child when they come home from school and they say, hey, Dad, I learned something new today. Boys can be girls and girls can be boys. What do I tell him? And that made me think with the idea of how that would affect our present truth message. And that took me into, you know, a season of prayer and wondering if this is the direction I should go. And so that's the direction I went. I actually had started the research for what I was hoping to be the second part of the Present Truth series, but I decided to go in a different direction. So I had to start research again and writing again, and that's how it happened.
This is a very personal book.
It is. I have some experiences with this, yeah.
Do you mind if I read just a little passage from this book?
Yes.
And I'm going to ask you to carry on.
Sure, go ahead.
Then came puberty. I was ashamed and embarrassed of my changing body. I did not want this to happen. Most boys are excited when they start becoming a man. Not me. I did not want to be a man.
Well, so you'll find that in this book, that particular one it's not my story.
Correct, it's not your story, it's Jim.
Yes,
yep.
So one of the things I did, because there's a number of ministries out there, and I found a ministry in particular of former members of the LGBTQ movement, and they share their own testimonies.
Yeah.
And I thought that it would be great to have stories of individuals who have been there, and of course they found victory and have come out, and so there's a number of those.
It's very personal. You're not pulling any punches.
Indeed.
You're choosing to address an issue, and you're going right to ground zero on this issue. Why is this issue important, really important in your own mind?
Well, we see society today. This is something that we hear constantly from all avenues in media. We see this kind of lifestyle now in movies and TV. Even cartoons are having this portrayed, and so this is very relevant. In my research, I've also found that this is very present in Christianity. We can't brush this under the rug, as it were, thinking that is not affecting Christianity. Yes, we see it everywhere in society, but it's not in the Christian church. That's not true.
Right, that's right.
And so being this the reality, we need to address this. We need to be willing to talk about it.
So as you talk about it, I know you're not picking a fight. I know you're not.
Oh, no, not at all.
However, you're going to scratch the itch. This is some people's experience. If you want to draw battle lines, you start to talk about this subject.
Right.
People have become very, very militant about this, very angry about this. And you started right here about something that's deeply personal, goes extraordinarily all the way down to the granular level with so many people. People can become defensive when their own family members are implicated in one way or another. So how are you going to, or how have you so far endeavored to convince people that you're not trying to shame or hate or condemn, but instead you're trying to enlighten? How do you find that balance?
Well, it's interesting. I started a series, a preaching series at my church based on the book, and I've heard some comments made because, again, being such a sensitive and controversial issue, some people were wondering, well, from which avenue is he addressing this? Is he being very critical? Is he being condemnatory? Or is he being more on the liberal side? And some have explained this and said, well, listen, no, you need to really listen to this. You need to read his book because he's very balanced on the issue. I believe we need to be balanced in standing for biblical principles. But it's possible at times to stand for biblical principles and condemn them. And I don't think people mean to condemn, but sometimes it comes out that way. And what I found in my research of those who experience this is they see the Christian church in that light. They don't affirm me. They don't love me. They don't want me around. I even heard a preacher say it this way: "Don't come into my church with that junk." Oh. And so it is. And again, I'm not saying that the preacher in any way meant to sound that way. But if you are part of that movement and this is what you hear, you want nothing to do with the Christian church.
That's right. That's right.
And so obviously, the reality is we're all sinners and come short of the glory of God. And so we need to treat others like we want to be treated. Jesus loves us, and he extends his hand to us, and he accepts us. Of course, he wants us to change, and he leads us in that process. We need to be willing to do the same. And so really the aim here is, as much as possible, be a reflection of Jesus. And that's basically my intention here.
How do you think we got to the place where LGBTQ plus is considered okay in the Christian church? Now, we're going to be careful because you talk about this, you have to just be careful every 2 minutes, so I'm going to be careful. The Son of Man did not come into the world to condemn the world, but to seek and to save that which was lost. So we're not trying to be condemnatory here, but it does seem pretty clear, if you read the Bible, that homosexuality, transgenderism, whatever else, isn't God's plan A. How do we get to the place where there are people in churches, every church, who would say, this lifestyle is all right and is acceptable with God? How do we get there?
I think it comes from saturation. We are constantly being saturated. And obviously, I believe Satan is behind this. When we're consistently saturated with an ideology and we're being told this is okay by the media, eventually we become convinced ourselves. We become convinced of a lie and we no longer see it as a problem. And I think that's part of what's happening in the church as well.
And the other thing too, Christians want to be nice. They want you to be accepting. They want you to be kind. And so sometimes it just feels kinder to say it's okay rather than to say,
Well, and at the risk of borrowing this word, being politically correct. We don't want to be misinterpreted.
Politically correct is a really big thing.
Yes.
We are sort of a little bit coming out of the age where you could be cancelled for having the wrong time set on your watch.
Yeah.
Political correctness is a big deal, particularly when the media en masse is driving this thing.
Right.
So yeah, politically correct. Some people refer to this as woke. Maybe it's the same, maybe it's slightly different. If you're not on, then you get pushed off, right off, and so that's a thing.
Indeed.
Fear
Of being misinterpreted, of saying, well, you're condemning me. And so there are obviously within Christianity, in our own denomination, churches that have said, well, we don't want to be like that, so we're becoming welcoming churches, and you can come in and we will welcome you. We will not condemn you. We will not talk about this issue in a negative way, in order to reach out to people.
Well, welcoming is good, though, right?
Yes.
Welcoming is good. How do we find the balance?
Well,
because look, I want to be welcoming.
Yes.
And I want them to come to my church, whether they're gay, straight, conservative, liberal, transgender, whatever else. And I will not use the term cisgender. I think that's a disgraceful term. Whether rich or poor, black or white, I want to be welcoming, right? Mm-hmm. That's appropriate.
Of course.
Yeah, but there's got to be a line somewhere.
So there's a difference between being welcoming and affirming.
Okay, talk about that.
And of course you see the subtitle of the book.
Yes, the subtitle is Understanding the Dangers of Affirmation. I like what you put next. And acting redemptively.
Right.
Acting redemptively. So let's talk about that. Because I'll tell you what I would do if I was a local church pastor. I've done this. Johnny comes to church, and he didn't, but let's say he says, Pastor, I think I'm gay. Well, Johnny, I'm not even going to blink as you say that. Mm-hmm. I just love you anyway.
Right.
And however we proceed from there, we proceed. But the point is that Johnny knows, this is your home, Johnny.
That's right.
I want you to be here. We love you. This is your church family. Maybe you've been here all your life. Nothing's going to change about that. That's welcoming. Mm-hmm. What's affirming?
Affirming would be taking that a step further and believing or communicating that that's okay, that is normal, and we're not going to condemn you for it.
So we're probably not going to condemn you for it anyway.
Right.
Yeah,
but when the church affirms this when it accepts it as okay.
Yeah.
And so there is obviously a growing movement within Christianity that churches affirm the LGBTQ community. In other words, accept it as normal. It's not a sin anymore, and they can be normal like everybody else in that sense.
I know the answer to the question, but I want to hear it from you. How in the world? Again, it's easy to sound condemnatory or intolerant. I hope we're not. How in the world do you read the Bible and say, it's okay? How does that happen? Now, I understand what's happening right now. There's someone saying, John, I can't believe you'd say that. I wanted my son to watch this program. You saying that will absolutely crush him. Sorry, I don't want your son to be crushed. Mm-hmm. But how do you read Romans chapter 1 and come away from that saying, it's okay? Because this is real important, because there's lots of people who will stand up and say it's okay. So how?
Well, it's, this issue is not the only sin issue that people are trying to justify.
Oh, that's a good insight.
And so, people will read into the Bible what they want in order to justify a particular behavior, a particular desire. And what I found in my research, quite frankly, in some cases, it was comical, if it wasn't that dangerous, of how people would interpret what the Bible says in order to justify what they want to get out of it. Yeah. And a couple of authors that I use as reference in the book do exactly that. They view everything from the worldview or the lens of gender issues.
Yes.
And so they go as back as say, even in the Bible, and they name a number of characters that, from their perspective, had gender dysphoria. And so it's
I can't think of any.
Well, listen, I couldn't think of any either, but again, they explain it this way.
Yeah.
I guess it shouldn't surprise. I mean, you've been a pastor long enough to understand that that's what people do. They look at the Bible, they want to miss or reinterpret it to, again, this satisfies my desire. It justifies what I want to do, and that's exactly what's happening here. And so I obviously spent some time here looking at these passages that talk about this issue, and I share how they see it, and why that is not the right way of
I
interpreting
believe you've
it.
done a very good job with the book, and it isn't condemnatory, but it's factual. So no one's going to be confused about how you see it or how you understand the Bible sees it. Let's talk about this. The dangers of affirmation. There have been entire denominations who have affirmed the shifting moral sands in the world today and have not aged well as a result. History has not been kind to them in terms of growth or even survival. What happens to a denomination when it affirms the LGBTQ movement? Not affirming them as folks and welcoming them, but affirming the lifestyle.
The ideology.
The ideology,
lifestyle, yes. Yeah. One of the arguments that is made by one of the resources that I use
Yes.
Is that in our particular denomination, if we were to affirm this ideology, it would not affect anything else that we believe in the denomination.
Wait, you didn't... Oh, you're saying...
That's the argument, that they make.
Yeah.
That's the argument that they make.
So they say if we affirm this, nothing
else has
changes.
to change.
Yeah. How true is that?
Well, it isn't. And one of the what I do as an example in the first book, The Present Truth and the Three Angels Message, we talk about this issue of creation versus theistic evolution, for example.
Sure.
And proponents of evolution or theistic evolution that are Christian make the same argument. We can accept evolution, but nothing else has to change,
Which is insane.
And I basically show it's like a domino effect. If we accept this, it'll fall like a dominoes. And so there's a number of other things that'll have to change as a result of that.
Yeah.
So I basically take the same approach. If we were to affirm the LGBTQ ideology based on the arguments that they're making to defend this, then there's a number of other beliefs that will also fall by the wayside.
So what falls first, or soon? What falls? What quickly falls?
Well, based on the arguments they make, a couple of the arguments they make.
Because what you've done here, you've cited your sources.
Right.
People
Indeed.
are quoted, examples are given, not to attack, but
Yeah.
to say these are the points that are being
So
made.
you've heard arguments that are made that Genesis is written in a poetic form.
Sure.
That is not literal, to be taken literal. It's sort of very poetic.
Which is a complete get out of jail
Right.
free
And
card.
so because it's poetic, it doesn't have to be dogmatic about these things.
In other words, it didn't mean anything.
Right. So just like when we think about creation itself, we believe creation took place in 6 little days,
Sure.
and God rested on the 7th day. That's what the Bible says.
Sure, that's what it says.
But if I interpret Genesis in a poetic way, then maybe it wasn't really literal days.
Yeah, what's
right?
a day, right?
And so obviously the belief on creation itself, that's one of the first things that if we were to affirm the LGBTQ ideology in the church, we'd have to revise our belief on creation as 6 literal days.
Well, why is that?
Well, again, because their argument is that Genesis is poetic. If I believe that Genesis is poetic, I can make any argument that I want.
I was about to say the very same thing, Pastor. If that's the ace up my sleeve, then nothing means anything because Genesis is poetic and I don't have to be bound by Genesis. I might want to add to that Exodus chapter 20 is poetic, so I'm not bound by the Ten Commandments either.
that is the other thing. So our belief in creation obviously goes down.
Yep.
Now we believe, as you follow Scripture, of course, we know that many of the writers of the books of the Bible quote Genesis. They believe
Yes, of
in
course.
the literal 6 days and God resting on the
Jesus
7th.
certainly did.
And Jesus certainly did. So obviously, if creation goes, then our reliability on Scripture goes, because obviously these prophets that wrote these books that believed in 6 literal days and God rested on the Sabbath, well, they were wrong.
I don't want to steal your thunder, and I don't know if you're going here, but the book of Revelation is out the window because Revelation
2/3 of it.
Yeah, it requires it quotes from the Old Testament.
Indeed.
It's the Old Testament.
Indeed.
Quotes the Ten Commandments.
Indeed.
Buttresses the creation story. Revelation has to be gone. Okay, but carry on. I don't mean get in your way
So
here.
we believe, of course. So I said creation, our reliability on Scripture.
Yep.
You mentioned Jesus. I mean, Jesus is a Messiah. He believed that the creation was 6 literal days. So was he wrong? And if he was wrong, is he really the Messiah?
Can't be.
Obviously, the Sabbath too, the seventh day, because if Genesis is poetic, then the argument could be made, well, maybe this issue of God resting on the seventh day is poetic as well, and maybe it's not, we don't have to be dogmatic about a particular day. Maybe it's just the concept of rest that we have to keep in mind. So the Sabbath, of course, goes out the window. The law goes out the window. Of course, you mentioned Revelation, and the concept of present truth.
Yes, and yes. Let's remind ourselves.
So
that
present
this is called
truth,
the present truth, and LGBTQ plus movement.
So present truth is God's last day message of preparation for the world before Jesus comes. Now we believe that message is found in Revelation 14 in the message of the three angels. And the message of the three angels, when you exegete them, you find there's a number of things that we learn from there. And so obviously part of that, for example, is the role of Babylon. And the role of how Babylon being an institution, if you will, that is the enemy of God and persecutes God's people, is a religious political system. The second angel's message talks about Babylon is fallen because she has made the world drink of the wine of her fornication, and the wine of her fornication, and I explained that in the first book, The Present Truth and the Three Angels' Message, are these beliefs that has confused the world.
Correct.
And confused Christianity. Among them is, obviously we believe that the seventh day Sabbath is the day of the Lord. It hasn't changed. Tradition has brought a different day. And so if the Sabbath is wrong from the perspective of Genesis written in poetic form, then our interpretation of the second angel's message is wrong, because Babylon didn't do anything wrong. If the day of rest was changed, well, there's nothing wrong with that, because the Sabbath in Genesis was poetic anyway, so why make a big deal about it? The mark of the beast in the third angel's message also, which is related to the Sabbath, well, that's not an issue anymore, because the Sabbath was a poetic thing in the first place. So you see, all the dominoes are falling. And what I found, and I share this in the book, is that from our church's perspective, our denomination, I show that our denomination has 28 fundamental beliefs, right? And again, the argument of one of the resources I share is that, well, nothing else would have to change. If this church becomes an affirming church, nothing else will have to change. But I share in it, because of these statements that I just made, these arguments that we're talking about, a number of our fundamental beliefs would have to change. Obviously, again, the belief on creation, the belief on the Sabbath, the belief of Revelation and the three angels' messages. We would have to also revise our baptismal vows, because the issue of family, now a marriage is not between a man and a woman anymore. It could be a mixture of things. You see how deep this can go? So it's blinding to think that we can just say we're going to just tweak this belief and affirm the LGBT ideology. And again, I say this respectfully,
yes,
because I hear my intention is to be loving, to be welcoming, as we talked about, but we need to stand firm on Bible principles. And we cannot change this one thing thinking it won't affect everything else. It will. It's
really interesting to me that there have not been too many other controverted lifestyle practices that seem to contradict the Bible that people have stood up in defense of. Mm-hmm. We still don't have yet a real movement in Christianity to defend adultery.
And it's an interesting...
we don't have that. Yeah. No one has ever come along and said, adultery should be accepted, and you are being very intolerant of me. That's right. Because I am not married yet, I have 4 partners. Or we live together and we're not married. Or I'm flagrantly promiscuous. No one's defending that.
Right. And so some people have asked me, why did you write this book? Why make such a big deal about this issue? And the answer to that is because nobody's out there, at least certainly in Christianity, trying to justify that adultery is okay.
Yeah.
Or that stealing is okay, etc. Nobody's saying that. But this issue, they are. On this particular issue, which the Bible is very clear on, oh no, the Bible's wrong on this, or you're seeing it the wrong way, this is okay. No other issue.
Are there many books like this in circulation?
Well, obviously, as part of my research, I found a number of them, Christian books that are very firm on following Bible principles.
Are there many books like this in circulation in the denomination which employs you?
No.
Now, that's interesting.
Yes.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I believe because it is a very controversial issue. As a matter of fact, I think, this is just my opinion, but I had to self-publish this book, and I believe I had to self-publish this book because it wasn't accepted by a particular publisher, maybe because it's controversial. And as a matter of fact, it's interesting because I've translated the manuscript into Spanish because I want to also publish it in Spanish, and I approached this particular publishing house about doing it in Spanish, and the response I've gotten, well, the Hispanic community is not really into reading things like this. I'm Hispanic, obviously, and it's a very relevant situation and a very relevant issue in our church. So we should be reading about this. We should be educating ourselves about this. That's one of the points of the reasons I wrote the book. Because since this is such a taboo subject, many people's beliefs about the LGBTQ issue is based on assumptions. When I was a child, calling somebody gay was an insult.
Yes, it was.
Right?
Yeah.
Obviously, that's not the case anymore, and it shouldn't be an insult.
I agree.
Okay? But it was an insult, and I had certain assumptions about a person that was gay or bisexual that in my research on this, I realized those assumptions are wrong. I've made certain bad assumptions, and it's based on misunderstandings. And so I think that a lot of people's perception on this issue is based on misunderstanding, especially the older generation. Because I'm dating myself, I'm 54, but just like when I was a kid, that's the way it was. A gay person was something weird, something was wrong with a gay person, and many people that grew up in my own generation feel the same way. But people are changing, and so society is changing. And I believe the changes in society as to how they feel about this issue, there may be a positive thing. Again, we don't want to condemn them.
Look, I tell you what, I think you're right about that. I grew up in a town where there was one well-known homosexual. There were bound to have been more, but he was known to be homosexual. He wasn't treated with respect.
Right.
And I was too young to be involved in the treating of him with disrespect. But man, I'd love to go back now and just say to people, no, don't be like that.
Right.
That's just awful. Don't treat him with disrespect. So that change is positive.
Yes, it's positive change.
You don't want to be awful to people about the way they choose to live their life. I don't think that's appropriate at all. Now, there's a couple of questions I have on my mind. I want to ask you how children are being educated about LGBTQ plus issues. I want to ask about that. But I'll ask you this first. Do you think in churches like yours, there's much teaching on the subject?
No.
Okay, is there much preaching on the subject?
No.
And as you've already said, there are no books on the subject.
Right.
Okay. So that being so, and I understand this keenly. When I said before, someone said, oh, John, why are you talking about this? My son is going to be crushed. Well, I mean that. Someone will be thinking that. Mm-hmm. And that it causes me pain to some degree because I don't want someone to be crushed.
Indeed.
But I also want that someone to know that God has a plan A and that plan A of God's is achievable.
It is.
In your life, whoever you are. So I think this is one of the reasons I welcome having you here to talk about this, because this is your point of view, your point of view in terms of how you understand the Bible. And it's important that it is heard because, Nelson, no one else is saying this. If they are, they're saying it quietly and in a corner.
Yeah.
Back to the first question I said I'd ask. How are our kids being educated on the subject today?
Well, in my denomination, the majority of kids are going to public schools, obviously. And in public schools, this issue is being taught as normal. And again, the genesis of the book was that question that the gentleman asked me, what do I tell my child when he comes home and says, Dad, you know what I learned today? Boys can be girls and girls can be boys. What do I tell my child? This is what they're hearing in school.
Yeah.
We are being bombarded in every area of social media, on the TV, movies, etc. And so clearly they're going to have questions. And there are people, there are Christians, there are Christian families where this is happening in their own families. This is what our children are being exposed to.
So
the internet is a very powerful source here.
Let's talk about the internet soon, because it is so powerful. It's so powerful. I can't remember the girl's name. There's a famous female singer today. I forget her name. I've not ever heard of music, of course, but she's a big deal, and her lifestyle does not square with the Bible. So she's accepted. She's really good at what she does, evidently. Kids love her, and she's gay. So I'm not saying they shouldn't love her. I'm not saying that.
Right.
But I'm saying this, that every television program now, many television programs portray LGBTQ plus subjects in a very positive light, without a word of balance to that only positive portrayal. So you've got music, you've got TV, movies, all media. It's so where are our kids being educated if they're not being educated at church, if there are sermons, no books, if the church school, probably not saying too much about it, if the denomination soft pedals, and if they're in public school, well, it's all on all the time. Now, the internet in general, let's discuss that. Let's discuss the challenge that the internet poses for young people and their education on this subject.
Social media influencers. If you were to go on YouTube and just type how to become a transgender, or how do you know you're a transgender, you'll find a plethora of results of influencers that tell you how to do it, why you need to do it, how to hide it from your parents, all those things.
Yeah, and this is one of the ghastly things. The system is set up these days to hide it from the parents, so that the parents don't get to intervene.
That's right.
Now I need to say this. This is a very real issue. And whatever the reason is that children decide to embrace these ideas, many do in sincerity. And it creates some real challenges for parents who wish there was another way, and so on. So I just want to repeat here, the intent of having this conversation isn't to share hate or intolerance or anger or mean-spiritedness, but perhaps to show there's more to the story, and that God has a plan, and that God's plan can be realized.
That's right.
It really should be realized.
Well, there are root causes for these issues of gender dysphoria.
Yes, talk about that, because you discussed that in the book.
Yes. And so unfortunately, we are living in a time where even in the area of mental health, the root causes are not discussed anymore. Or and I say this with respect to any mental health professional that may be watching, but this is what I found in my research, is that maybe the standard operating procedure of mental health in the past, and it is in many issues. All right, if you're dealing with anxiety, if you're dealing with depression, let's look at the root causes, why this is happening.
Yes, sure.
Okay, that's the right way to do it.
Of course.
But in this area of gender dysphoria, gender variancy,
it's not
they're
discussed.
no longer told you can't look for. They're told, don't look for the root causes. Refer them now to the appropriate authorities in order for them to go to the next step.
And you know what I've heard. You go online and they say, if you don't like the sound of your voice, it may be because it's you're trans. If you don't like the way your body looks, I read that a little bit earlier, but again, What 12, 13, 14-year-old likes the way their body looks? Everyone's
That's right.
awkward at that age. You're going through changes you don't quite understand. All sorts of reasons. If you don't like this or that, maybe you're transgender.
Mm-hmm.
How about maybe you're not? You just don't like the way your body looks. No one likes the sound of their own voice. People look at you funny. You're breaking out with acne, or you've got long gangly legs now that you haven't yet grown into. Maybe you're just growing.
Well, there's a few of the stories that I share here in the book. One in particular, and it's all over social media. Chloe Cole is a good example of this. As a teenager, early teen, she felt a certain way. The parents referred her. She had surgery, and then realized, I made a mistake. But now she has taken a number of steps that, in some cases, are irreversible.
That's right.
And what we see is that a good number, if perhaps even the majority of those who are struggling with this, realize this in their teens, right? So they're young, they're being influenced online and convinced that, there's something wrong with you, you're a transgender, in their teens. And we in society and health professionals, et cetera, are being told, you got to take their word for it. They know what they're talking about.
14 years old.
Exactly. And so the argument I make, listen, having graduated myself from the teenager school, hard school of Knox, whatever you want to call it, I realize that teenagers, they can be so passionate about a particular thing.
That's right.
It's a life and death situation for them, only to change your mind 2 days later.
That's correct.
Right? And we as a society recognize that teenagers are too immature to vote, to join the military, to drive a car. Yeah. They're too young for that. But when it comes onto this issue, all of a sudden they're mature enough to make that decision. It makes no sense. It's contradictory.
You can't get a tattoo until you're 18.
That's right.
And you think you can make a decision like this to irreversibly alter your own body and jeopardize your reproductive health, maybe almost certainly destroy your ability to procreate later in life, to experience sexual pleasure later in life? You can make that decision when you're 7, 9, 11, 12, 15, 17. It's a strange society that says it's okay for a 13-year-old girl to decide that she needs to be a boy or vice versa.
That's right.
And that's not healthy, and it's not consistent with the principles of the Bible. Now, let me balance that. Okay? You're 21 years old. You say, I'm not a man, I'm a woman. Why? Look, it's none of your business. I'm 21. I'm a woman, not a man. What can I say?
Yeah.
I think what I say is, I don't quite know how I'm going to proceed with this discussion because I don't know my relationship to the person. But I think I say, all right, well, I respect your decision. It's not against the law. You are the master of your own destiny. You have agency over your own body. I'm not going to pick up a stone and cast it at you. I will love you after your surgery. But you're a grown adult. It's your decision to make. Is that fair?
Yes. I don't have a problem with an adult making those decisions, however misguided they may be, and whether I agree with it or not. I don't have a problem with that because you're an adult.
Yeah.
But to say that it's okay for our kids to do that, that's just wrong.
It defies common sense.
That's right.
Now, again, let me be careful. I have friends dealing with this very issue. Your child may genuinely believe that this is so, for whatever reason. All right, be kind, be gracious, but I wouldn't be hurrying them down to some clinic to have life-altering surgery at 15 or 16 years of age. Give this thing time, and if the child still feels this way when the child is an adult, then...
And some of the medical professionals that I cite in the book also will mention that this is something that'll change. They will grow out of this. And
yes, you quote medical professionals who will state that.
Yes, and so what we're hearing is, let's just hurry them to get hormones and sex reassignment surgery. They're not giving time for this to change. Again, teenagers, they change quickly.
So do you have an opinion as to why the medical establishment seems hell-bent on rushing young people into, and I say that medical establishment very generally speaking, rushing young people into irreversible surgery? I can't think of very many other situations where they would act with such aggression So what do you think is driving it? I've heard people say, well, you get a kid and they transition, you have a patient for life. Okay. Yeah, be that as it may. I can't imagine that money is the sole motivator. Medical providers have other ways of making money. What do you think it is that's driving
I can't say that I'm pinpoint a reason other than, when we look in Scripture, and by the way, one of the things that I mentioned in the book is that we need to look at this from a biblical worldview.
Yes,
you have the secular worldview, a biblical worldview. When you look at this from the biblical worldview, you realize that we're in the middle of a great controversy.
Correct.
The controversy between good and evil. Satan is working hard. He knows his time is short, and so he's seeking to deceive, and so he does this in various ways. And so I believe that he is behind science today, which, by the way, we've learned how unreliable science is, in the sense that, it changes, every 2 weeks, it's something new.
Yes, it
does.
does.
And so this is the same in this area.
And I'm going to interject here and say that science often proves what the person funding the research wants it to prove.
That's right. There's always money behind it.
That's just a truism.
That's right.
Okay, let's look at this from the biblical point of view. My wife and I are raising our gaggle of children. Let us say, for example, one of them comes home at whatever age, and it doesn't really matter, and says, I have questions. I don't think I'm this. I think I'm that. I'm gay. I'm bi. I'm trans. I'm whatever I am. Where do parents begin?
Well, I believe that one of the challenges in Christianity, and I've discovered this in just having conversations with friends in the church in that way, is that many look at this issue of the LGBTQ plus ideology and lifestyle as the sin, as opposed to a sin.
Very glad you said so. Carry on with that. That's a great point.
So when we look at it from the sin perspective, we are saying in some ways that this is a sin that is worse than anything else.
Yes, another one akin to this is abortion.
Right.
I'm not supportive of it in any way, shape, or form, but some act as though if you have gone in that direction, you are the enemy of God for all eternity, and that could not be further from the truth. So
in the mind of some, unconsciously, this is, you can't redeem this. Not even God can do anything about
Correct.
this.
You'll have people who say that, and it's awful.
And so if you are a parent that sees this as that way, as the sin, you may go crazy and maybe start yelling at your child. You are not going to do this. Maybe some parents kick their kids out of the house because they can't fathom that their child is dealing with this issue. But when you look at this from a perspective of a sin, now, we are all sinners and come short of the glory of God. We all have the common disease of sin, and the common solution is Jesus. It doesn't matter what sin. And so what I share in the book is that we need to have conversations. And by a matter of fact, not just our children, but we should be willing to build relationships with everybody, including people that we know are under this umbrella of the LGBTQ. We don't need to shy away. Let's build relationships. Let's make friends, because that's how we witness. Yes. We want to lead people to Jesus.
Yes.
I share a personal story in the book that happened with my daughter. It's in there. My daughter gave me permission to put it in there because she had an experience in one of the church schools, mind you, that was an experience with a member, another young lady. And it was a confusing time for her. And I'm glad that the school reached out to us, and we were able to meet with the school and have conversations with our daughter. And she, as part of my research, I had an interview with her, and I asked her, what was in your mind during that time? And she was able to explain to me the confusion, the depression she was going through, and how certain feelings were confused, and that led to something that wasn't real. And she, of course, woke up and understood that. But one key thing, my wife and I, we never yelled at her. We never condemned her. I mean, obviously, she knew where we stood here, and we prayed together, we cried together, but together we saw ourselves out of this. And today, and she's doing well, and she was able to tell me, listen, this is why I felt this way. And I believe, again, this goes to the root causes. If we're willing to have conversations with individuals, certainly with our children, you will find the root causes. Be willing to do that, but not in a condemnatory way, not yelling. You got to love your children. They need to know where you stand and that you're not going to compromise the biblical principles, but you're not going to stop loving them either.
That's right. That's very important.
Yeah.
And now I want you to talk about this because this is coming to a church near you, wherever you are. It probably has already.
It's already ready.
But if it hadn't come to your little church or your big church, it's on its way. I want to hear from you what you have to say about this.
So there's an example that I bring out in the book that actually obtained from one of my resources. And it's a fictitious character. And so the fictitious character's name is Alex. And Alex is a transgender woman, which means he was born as a male but transitioned to a female. And Alex, the example that I present, Alex came to a series of evangelistic meetings and came to every one of the meetings. At the end of the meetings, Alex accepts Jesus Christ, repents of his sin, including the sin of transition. At this point, Alex has taken all the hormones. Alex looks like a woman.
Yeah, there's no going back.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but Alex has accepted Jesus, has repented of his sins, and wants to be baptized. And so I asked the question, do we baptize Alex? And I asked a series of rhetorical questions. Well, if we do we require Alex to change his name right away? Do we require Alex, including, do we believe that Alex's sense of gender dysphoria is going to change in a day? Do we require Alex to have surgery to correct the issues, et cetera, okay? And there's going to be various opinions about that. But the reality is, this is such a complex issue that there are some questions are not easily answered. And I have found, unfortunately, there are many well-meaning members that are quick to share their opinions about what the leaders and the pastors should do, but it's a different story when you're the pastor and you got to make those decisions, especially when you want to stand firm on biblical principles, but at the same time be reflective of Jesus and act redemptively like he's acted toward us. So what do we do here? And the reality is, if Alex has truly accepted Christ, we got to take Alex's words for it, right? We can't just say, well, I don't know because you still look like a woman. Well, the reality is Alex can't change right away. Alex is going to look, he may start calling himself Alexander, but he still looks like a woman. And that's not going to be corrected right away. And we shouldn't expect that. I asked, well, think about it. If we as a church say, well, yeah, we can baptize it, but you have to have surgery first, who's going to pay for the surgery?
That's right.
Are you going to pay for the surgery? Should the church pay for the surgery?
It's a lot like asking somebody to remove their tattoos first,
yes,
for example.
Exactly. And so the reality is, if Alex has truly received Jesus as Savior and Lord, has repented of his sins, and we can help him in the process of making whatever corrections that need to be made, but again, this is not going to happen in a day, we take Alex's word for it and we baptize Alex. And if Alex is a baptized member, think about this, Alex is a member in good standing and can participate in anything in the church according to the gifts that God has given Alex. Now, I realize that in saying this, there are members of my particular denomination that says, that's compromising with sin, Pastor. Listen, I disagree. Listen, because the reality is we're all sinners. We don't ask anybody else, the adulterer or the alcoholic, when they come in there and give their lives to Jesus, are you sincere? Do I have to visit you at your home to see if you're drinking alcohol? No. If they've repented and they confess that Jesus is Savior and Lord, we accept their word for it. We baptize them.
100%.
And we realize that it doesn't mean that the next day after baptism that the sky is pink with polka dots on it. No, they're still going to have some struggles, like we all do. But God is patient with us. And so I share the reality of the gospel of transformation. God can change, God can transform, but there is a process. Transformation, God can certainly transform you like this. But most of the time, there's a process.
Yeah,
that
how many smokers have you met who took 2 years to quit smoking?
Yeah.
And then the day after they were baptized, they relapsed into smoking.
Yes.
And then 6 months later, they quit for a day. And maybe 10 years later, they finally got rid of it.
Yes.
That's not to soft pedal. It's just sometimes that's the way the process plays out. And in those processes, you're redemptive and kind and gracious and loving, and you point people towards Jesus. It's a complex one.
It is.
When you start talking about moral issues and issues of sexuality, some people are creeped out by it. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying they should or shouldn't be. It's a challenging one for some people, And so we got to be gracious and tolerant, and even towards each other as we sort of wrestle with this. But certainly the person in the middle who's dealing with confusing thoughts or going through changes of one way or another, gotta be loving.
Yes. Now, listen, love is a word that we throw out.
Oh, yeah.
Very much out there. And unfortunately, we live in a time, especially in the area of this topic, where they say, well, if you don't affirm me, if you don't believe as I do, you're not really loving.
Sure.
And so that is a reality. But it is possible to be loving and not affirming.
Okay, so this is what I want to ask you earlier on. And you just answered the question, but we need to look at this. You have a couple in your church, a person in your church, and they see this view differently. I'll ask the question, but you just answered it. Is it possible to disagree with them and love them?
Yes,
at the same time.
And I share a story in the book of my own experience in one of the churches that I pastored of an individual that his name, it was Kathy. Well, I knew her as Kathy, but he was a gentleman. He was a man, and we found that out through some of the health professionals in the area that knew him because he was treated in some of the clinics in the area. So they knew him as a man, even though he came to our church as Kathy. And so we had some dynamic issues. There were some concerns as what bathroom he was going to use,
sure.
etc.
Yeah.
And so there were some legal issues that we had to address. But ultimately, I remember we visited with Kathy. And by the way, I called. I knew, even when I knew it was a him, I called him Kathy, and you follow your conscience on this. Names, can there are cultural issues of his names, and so, but you'll follow your own conscience on that. But I called him Kathy, and we, my head elder and I, visited with Kathy several times, and Kathy shared his story and about his belief and where he is, and he wanted some time for us to even give him a platform in the church to educate the church, as it were. We explained what we as a church believe, the biblical principles, and that we were not going to compromise on that. But we reiterated, you're welcome to come to our church, and we'll love you, and we can be our friends. And, well, the point is, Kathy kept coming back. Sabbath after Sabbath after Sabbath, Kathy was at church.
Kathy clearly believed you
Right.
when you said, we'll love
Right.
you.
And so, and even though, and Kathy knew where we stood as a church in our biblical principle, we were not going to compromise this, but Kathy kept coming back. We loved Kathy. We sat with Kathy at potluck and had dinner, lunch. When she got sick, we went to the hospital and visited with Kathy. And so Kathy was able to see that even though we disagreed with this situation, because Kathy was a transgender, she kept coming back and felt love. So it's possible to love and not to affirm. And this is an example. Now, the reality is that's not going to work in some areas. As a matter of fact, Kathy told us, listen, I'm not going to ruffle any feathers, but I know of people that would take you to court, because what we had to do is this particular church was fortunate we had a bathroom off the fellowship hall, and we were able to say, listen, Kathy, can you use this bathroom? And she was agree with it. But she did say, listen, I know of friends of mine that would have taken you to court for doing this.
You know what I know. Here's what I know, man, because this is my experience, and I've seen it played out again and again. In the church, God's people are fabulously tolerant. Mm-hmm. Now, someone's going to say, oh, that's not true. Yes, it is. It's good to have the conversation. Any last words? What do you hope is going to come from the writing of this book?
Well, I hope the book can become a tool for church leaders on how to handle this if it were to happen in their churches.
It will.
And it will.
It just will.
Again, it's just a matter of time.
And by the way, I hope it will. And the reason I say that is because you want gay, bisexual, you want them in church.
That's right.
And so people bring their whole selves to church. You're going to get some drunks. You're going to get some people who work out at the gym. You're going to get some taxi drivers. You're going to get some gay people. You're going to get some pharmacists, right? Because the gospel is a net that brings all kinds of people to Jesus. So you want this issue to come to you. You just hope and pray that it doesn't come in a destructive way.
So you're going back to the genesis of the book, that question that the gentleman asked me at camp meeting. What do I tell my son if he comes from school and tells me, Dad, boys can be girls. What do I do about that?
Yeah.
My hope is that this book will provide some sources. Well, this is what you can do in order to help your child. Church leaders, this is what you can do, what you should do in order to reach redemptively to this person while standing firm on biblical principles. Furthermore, for the church at large, at least in our denomination, to highlight the fact that our church should never become an affirming church. To do that would be to compromise with sin, and it would damage our credibility, and certainly it would damage the present truth message. The church would have to change a number of their beliefs, and everything, like you mentioned before, other churches that have compromised on this, they've all gone downhill. And the same thing will happen with our denomination. So with all the love in our heart, let's reach out. Let's be a reflection of Jesus, but never compromise with sin, never become an affirming church.
I wish you the very best. I wish that people who read the book, in fact, here's what I know. People who read the book are not going to have a problem with you. People who see the book and jump to conclusions and make assumptions, yes, they may be harsh critics.
Yes.
But I applaud the courage that I know it took to write this. In fact, you're probably going to say it wasn't courage. You just felt led by God to do this because it seemed like the right thing to do. But I applaud you being willing to do that. I pray that this promotes healing, that it doesn't promote division, that it encourages and fosters discussion and generates lots and lots of light and precious little heat. Thanks for what you've done.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Pastor Nelson Mercado, really appreciate you being here on Conversations.
Thank you.
Here's the book by Pastor Nelson Mercado, The Present Truth and the LGBTQ Movement. The subtitle, Understanding the Dangers of Affirmation While Acting Redemptively. If you'd like to get a copy, go to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or find an ABC near you. You may find it there. With Pastor Nelson Mercado, I'm John Bradshaw. This has been our conversation.